Every single day after school, a small boy would stop at the same spot on Maple Street. His backpack hung loose on his thin shoulders, worn at the edges from years of use. But he never seemed to notice the weight. His eyes were always fixed on something else, something that made everything else disappear. Through the large glass window of Henderson's music store, there it was, a beautiful black piano that seemed to glow under the soft lights inside. The boy would press his hands against the cool glass, his breath fogging up the window as he stared. Sometimes he'd stay there for 10 minutes, sometimes 20, just looking, just dreaming. His name was Daniel, and he was 9 years old. He lived with his parents in a cramped apartment right above the coin laundry on 4th Street. The walls were thin enough that you could hear everything from the neighbors. The paint was peeling in the corners. But it was home, and his parents worked hard to keep it that way. Daniel's mother was a nurse at County General Hospital. She worked the long shifts, the ones that started early in the morning and didn't end until late at night. Sometimes she'd work doubles when they needed extra hands. Her feet always hurt and she was always tired, but she never complained. Not once. His father drove a delivery truck for a furniture company across town. He'd leave before the sun came up and return after it went down. On weekends, he'd take odd jobs fixing things for neighbors, anything to bring in a little extra money. The truck broke down often, and fixing it ate into whatever savings they managed to scrape together. There was no money for extras in Daniel's house. No fancy toys, no video games, definitely no piano. His mother had smiled sadly when he first mentioned wanting to learn. "Maybe someday, sweetheart," she'd said, but they both knew what that really meant. Still, Daniel couldn't stop himself from stopping at that window every single day. There was something about the piano that pulled at him. He'd never even touched a real one, but somehow he knew. He just knew that his fingers belonged on those keys. One Thursday afternoon, it was pouring rain. The kind of heavy rain that soaks through your clothes in seconds. Most kids ran straight home, but Daniel stood at his usual spot, water dripping from his hair, his shoes completely soaked through. He didn't care. He was watching an older woman inside the store playing something beautiful on the piano. Her fingers danced across the keys like magic. The door to the shop suddenly opened. An elderly man with white hair and kind eyes looked out at him. "Son, you're going to catch your death out here," he said. "Why don't you come inside?" Daniel hesitated. He'd never actually gone into the store before. What if they kicked him out? What if they knew he couldn't afford anything? But the rain was really coming down hard now, so he stepped inside, leaving wet footprints on the clean floor. "Sorry about the mess," Daniel mumbled. Looking down at his soaked sneakers, the old man waved his hand. "Floors can be mopped. Can't say the same for young boys with pneumonia." He smiled warmly. "I'm Mr. Henderson. I own this place. And I've noticed you out there, looking through my window every day for the past 3 months." Daniel's face turned red. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to be weird or anything. I just really like looking at the piano." "Nothing weird about appreciating something beautiful," Mr. Henderson said. He gestured toward the black piano Daniel had been staring at for so long. "You ever played one before?" Daniel shook his head. "No, sir. We had this old keyboard at school, but half the keys don't work anymore. I taught myself a little bit on that." "Well then," Mr. Henderson said, pulling out the piano bench. "Go ahead. Try it." Daniel's heart nearly stopped. "Really, I can touch it?" "That's what pianos are for, son. They're meant to be played, not just looked at." With trembling hands, Daniel sat down on the bench. It was too big for him, and his feet barely touched the floor. Up close, the piano was even more beautiful. The keys were smooth and perfect, black and white stretching out before him like a promise. He placed his small fingers on the keys, feeling their coolness. Then slowly, carefully, he began to play the simple melody he'd taught himself on the broken school keyboard. His fingers fumbled a bit. The notes weren't perfect. But there was something there, something real and honest. When he finished, he looked up at Mr. Henderson nervously. "That was pretty bad, wasn't it?" The old man was quiet for a moment, then he smiled. Not a polite smile, but a real one that reached his eyes. "You know what I heard? I heard someone who loves music. Really loves it. That's rarer than you might think." Daniel didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever talked to him like this before. Mr. Henderson pulled up a stool and sat down beside the piano. "Let me tell you something, Daniel. I've owned this store for 42 years. I've seen kids whose parents bought them the most expensive pianos money can buy. Private lessons with famous teachers, all the best opportunities.
And you know what?
Half of them quit within a year because they never really wanted it. Their parents wanted it. He looked at Daniel seriously. But you, standing out there in the rain just to look at a piano through a window, that tells me something different. That tells me you've got something that can't be bought. What's that? Daniel asked quietly. Passion. Real, honest-to-goodness passion. Mr. Henderson stood up and walked to his desk. I've got a proposition for you. This store gets dusty. Floors need sweeping. Windows need cleaning. Nothing too hard, but it takes time I don't always have. What if you helped me out after school? Maybe an hour of work? Daniel nodded eagerly. Yes, sir, I can do that. Good. And in return, after you finish your work, you can practice on this piano for an hour each day. Free of charge, deal? Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. His eyes went wide, and for a second he thought he might cry. Really? You'd let me do that? I would. But you've got to promise me something. You've got to promise to take it seriously, show up every day, do the work. Practice hard. No shortcuts, I promise, Daniel said, and he meant it with every part of his heart. I promise I won't let you down. That's how it started. Every day after school, while other kids were playing basketball or riding bikes or hanging out at the convenience store, Daniel was at Henderson's music store. First, he'd sweep the floors and dust the instruments and clean the big front window from the inside. Then, once his work was done, he'd sit at that beautiful black piano and practice. His parents didn't understand at first. His mother worried he was wasting time that could be spent on homework or making friends. His father thought it was just a phase, something Daniel would get tired of after a few weeks. But weeks turned into months, and Daniel never missed a single day. His fingers grew stronger. The simple melodies became more complex. He'd check out books about music from the library and study them while eating his lunch at school. Mr. Henderson would sometimes show him things, point out techniques, but mostly he just let Daniel figure it out on his own. There was something happening in that little music store, something special. Daniel was finding a part of himself he never knew existed. And for the first time in his life, he had a dream that felt real. A dream that felt possible. He didn't know it yet. But that dream was about to be tested in ways he never imagined. Spring arrived at Lincoln Elementary School, and with it came the announcement that made Daniel's heart race. Mrs. Patterson, the music teacher, stood in front of the class with a bright smile on her face. Attention, everyone, she said, clapping her hands together. Our annual talent showcase is coming up in 6 weeks. Anyone interested in performing should sign up by Friday. Daniel felt electricity shoot through his body. This was it. This was his chance to show everyone what he'd been working on. For the past 6 months, he'd been practicing a classical piece that Mr. Henderson had suggested. It was challenging, maybe too challenging for someone who'd only been playing for half a year, but Daniel had practiced it so many times that his fingers knew every note by heart. During lunch, he walked up to the sign-up sheet posted outside the music room. His hand shook slightly as he wrote his name under piano performance. A few kids walked by and glanced at the sheet, but nobody said anything. Not yet. By the next morning, everything had changed. Daniel was getting his books from his locker when he heard the laughter. A group of kids stood by the water fountain and they were looking right at him. Tommy Chen, whose parents owned the biggest restaurant in town, was in the middle of the group. Did you guys see this? Tommy said loudly, holding up his phone. Someone had taken a picture of the sign-up sheet and shared it in the class group chat. Daniel thinks he's going to play piano at the showcase. The other kids giggled. A girl named Ashley, who always wore expensive clothes and carried a designer backpack, shook her head. That's actually kind of sad. Doesn't he know piano isn't for people like him? Daniel felt his face get hot. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in his throat. He just closed his locker and walked away, their laughter following him down the hallway. It got worse during lunch. Daniel sat at his usual spot in the corner of the cafeteria, trying to focus on his sandwich. But he could hear them. Tommy and his friends sat a few tables away, talking just loud enough to make sure he could hear every word. My parents have been paying for my piano lessons since I was 4, Tommy announced. We have a Steinway grand piano in our living room. Cost more than most people's cars. And my instructor charges $300 an hour. His friend Kevin nodded. Yeah, real piano takes years of proper training. You can't just learn it by messing around in some dusty old store. Ashley chimed in. I heard he practices at Henderson's music store. Like the guy just lets him play there because he feels sorry for him. That's not the same as actual lessons, Tommy laughed. This is going to be so embarrassing. He's going to get up there and make a fool of himself in front of the whole school. Someone should tell him to quit while he's ahead. Daniel's hands were shaking. He couldn't finish his lunch. His stomach felt twisted up in knots. He'd been so excited about the showcase, but now all he could think about was everyone laughing at him. Just like they were laughing now. Even some of the teachers seemed doubtful. Mr. Rodriguez, the gym teacher, pulled Daniel aside after class one day. "Hey, buddy, I saw you signed up for the talent show. That's great and all. But have you thought about doing something else? Maybe something a little easier." "Like what?" Daniel asked quietly. "Well, you're pretty good at dodgeball. Maybe you could do some kind of sports demonstration. Or maybe play the recorder? That's a simpler instrument. Piano is really complicated, you know. It takes years and years of expensive training." Daniel just nodded and walked away. Even the adults didn't believe in him. The worst part was Tommy's performance in music class. Mrs. Patterson had asked students who were performing in the showcase to give the class a preview. When Tommy's turn came, he sat at the classroom piano like he owned it. His posture was perfect. His hands moved across the keys with practiced precision. The piece he played was technically flawless. Every note was exactly right. The timing was perfect. The dynamics were textbook. When he finished, the class clapped politely. Mrs. Patterson praised his technique and his discipline. But Daniel noticed something. The music was cold. Perfect, yes, but empty. It was like watching a robot play. There was no feeling in it, no heart. Just notes strung together correctly. Still, Tommy stood up and took an exaggerated bow. Then he looked directly at Daniel. "That's what real piano playing sounds like," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe you should think about that before you embarrass yourself in front of the whole school." Some kids laughed. Others looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Patterson told Tommy to sit down, but the damage was done. Daniel felt smaller than ever. The whispers followed him everywhere. In the hallways between classes. On the playground during recess. Even in the bathroom, he'd hear kids talking about him. "Did you hear Daniel's going to play piano? This is going to be a disaster. I almost feel bad for him. Someone should tell him to drop out." Daniel's confidence started to crack. When he went to Henderson's music store that afternoon, his playing was off. He kept making mistakes, hitting wrong notes, losing his place in the piece. His mind was too full of doubt. Mr. Henderson noticed immediately. He walked over and sat on his usual stool beside the piano. "What's going on, son? You've been playing this piece beautifully for weeks. Today you can barely get through it." Daniel's eyes started to burn with tears he refused to let fall. Maybe everyone's right. Maybe I'm not good enough. Tommy's been taking lessons since he was 4. He has a fancy piano and an expensive teacher. What do I have? I just mess around here for an hour after sweeping your floors. Stop right there, Mr. Henderson said firmly. His voice wasn't angry, but it was serious. First of all, you don't mess around. You work harder than any student I've ever seen. Second, you want to know what Tommy has that you don't? Daniel looked up at him. Tommy has technique, and that's fine. Technique is important, but you know what you have that Tommy doesn't? You have soul. You have heart. When you play, I can hear every ounce of love you have for music pouring out of that piano. Tommy plays like he's checking boxes on a homework assignment. You play like your life depends on it. But what if I mess up at the showcase? What if everyone laughs at me? Mr. Henderson was quiet for a moment. They might. Some people always laugh at things they don't understand. But let me ask you something. Why did you sign up for this showcase in the first place? Because I love playing piano, Daniel said softly. Because music makes me feel like I can be something more than just a poor kid from the apartment above the laundry. Exactly. You didn't sign up to impress Tommy or Ashley or anyone else. You signed up because you have something to say and the piano is how you say it. The old man smiled. Real music isn't about being perfect. It's about being true. You remember that? Daniel nodded, but the doubt still lingered. That night at home, he could barely eat dinner. His mother noticed him pushing food around his plate. What's wrong, sweetie? She asked. Nothing, he lied. But his father saw right through it. It's about that talent show, isn't it? Kids giving you a hard time? Daniel's silence was answer enough. His mother reached across the table and took his hand. You know, when I was your age, I wanted to be a dancer. I loved it more than anything. But my family didn't have money for lessons and the other girls at school made fun of me for it. So I quit. I gave up. She squeezed his hand tighter. I'm 52 years old now and I still think about it. I still wonder what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to try. If I'd cared less about what other people thought and more about what made my heart sing. Her eyes were serious now. I don't want that for you, Daniel. I don't want you lying awake 30 years from now wondering what if. You're going to get up on that stage and you're going to play your heart out. And whatever happens after that, at least you'll know you were brave enough to try. His father nodded. Your mom's right. The only real failure is not trying at all. That night, lying in his small bed in his small room, Daniel made a decision. He was scared. Terrified, actually. But he wasn't going to quit. He was going to walk onto that stage and show everyone what music really meant to him, even if they laughed. Even if he wasn't perfect, he was going to play. 2 weeks before the showcase, Daniel arrived at Henderson's music store like he did every day. But something was different. There was an ambulance parked outside, its lights flashing red and blue against the storefront windows. His heart dropped into his stomach. He ran to the door just as paramedics were wheeling someone out on a stretcher. It was Mr. Henderson. His face was pale, almost gray, and there was an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. His eyes were closed. What happened? Daniel asked frantically, grabbing the arm of one of the paramedics. Heart attack, the woman said gently. Are you family? Daniel shook his head, unable to speak. He watched helplessly as they loaded Mr. Henderson into the ambulance. Mrs. Rodriguez, who owned the flower shop next door, put her hand on Daniel's shoulder. He's going to be okay. Sweetie, she said, though her voice didn't sound very sure. They're taking him to County General. He's in good hands. The ambulance drove away, sirens wailing. Daniel stood on the sidewalk staring at the now dark music store. There was a hastily written sign on the door. Closed until further notice. His practice space was gone. Just like that. 2 weeks before the most important performance of his life, and he had nowhere to play. The school's piano was locked up in the music room after classes ended. His apartment building didn't have a piano. He couldn't afford to rent practice time anywhere else. Daniel walked home slowly that day, his backpack feeling heavier than ever. When he got to his apartment, he didn't even turn on the lights. He just sat in the dark living room feeling like everything was falling apart. At school the next day, things got even worse. Tommy had somehow found out about Mr. Henderson's heart attack. During lunch, he made sure everyone could hear him. Did you guys hear? The old guy from the music store had a heart attack. Store's closed now. He looked over at Daniel with fake sympathy. That's where Daniel practices, right? Or I guess practiced. Past tense, his friend Kevin jumped in. Man, that's rough timing. 2 weeks before the showcase and nowhere to practice. That's basically game over. Ashley actually looked a tiny bit concerned. Maybe he should just drop out. I mean, it's not his fault. He's got a good excuse now. But Tommy shook his head. No way, I want to see this. I want to watch him try to play after not practicing for 2 weeks. It's going to be legendary. In a bad way, they all laughed. Daniel felt his face burn red with anger and shame. But more than that, he felt defeated. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was the universe telling him to give up. Maybe kids like him weren't supposed to have dreams this big. That afternoon, he wandered around town instead of going straight home. He ended up back at Henderson's music store, pressing his hands against the glass window like he used to do before Mr. Henderson invited him in. The piano sat there in the darkness, silent and unreachable. Why are you torturing yourself? Daniel jumped. Mrs. Patterson, his music teacher, was standing behind him with grocery bags in her hands. She lived a few blocks away from the store. I just miss it, Daniel said quietly. I miss playing. Mrs. Patterson studied him for a long moment. You're really serious about this showcase, aren't you? This isn't just some passing thing for you. No, ma'am, it's not. She was quiet for a bit, then she shifted her grocery bags. The school has a piano in the music room. You know that. Yeah, but it's locked after school ends. It is, she agreed. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a key ring. She removed one key and held it out to him. This opens the side door near the music room. Be there tomorrow morning at 6. I'll meet you and let you into the room. You can practice for an hour before school starts. Daniel's eyes went wide. Really? You'd do that for me? I've been teaching for 23 years, Mrs. Patterson said. I've seen a lot of kids sign up for showcases. Most of them do it for attention or because their parents push them. But you You signed up because you actually care. That's rare. Too rare to let slip away. She pressed the key into his hand. 6 in the morning. Don't be late. And don't tell anyone else about this arrangement. I'm not running a 24-hour piano rental service. Thank you, Daniel whispered. Thank you so much. That night, Daniel set 3 different alarms. His mother noticed and asked him what was going on. When he explained, she looked at him with tired but proud eyes. 6 in the morning? That means you need to leave here by 5:30. It's dark out then, I know. I'll be careful. His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'll take you. I start my shift at 7 anyway. I'll just leave a little earlier and walk you to school first. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she said firmly. If you're going to be this dedicated, the least I can do is make sure you get there safely. The next morning, Daniel's alarm went off at 5. He was so nervous he'd barely slept. He got dressed quietly, trying not to wake his father, who had to be at work by 6:30. His mother was already in the kitchen, making instant coffee. They walked through the dark streets together, their breath visible in the cold morning air. The town looked different at this hour. Streetlights cast long shadows. A few delivery trucks rumbled past. Most houses were still dark. You know what I'm proud of, his mother said as they walked. It's not that you're talented. Talent is just something you're born with. What I'm proud of is that you're willing to work this hard. That's character. That's who you choose to be. They reached Lincoln Elementary just as the sky was starting to turn purple at the edges. Mrs. Patterson was already there, waiting by the side door with a thermos of coffee. Right on time, she said approvingly. She unlocked the door and led them through the quiet hallways to the music room. The building felt strange when it was empty, almost like a different place entirely. Mrs. Patterson flipped on the lights in the music room. The piano sat there waiting. It wasn't as nice as the one at Henderson's music store, but it would do. 1 hour, Mrs. Patterson said. I'll be in my classroom doing some work. When your time is up, come find me and I'll let you out. Daniel's mother gave him a hug. I've got to get to the hospital. You practice hard, okay? I will. Thanks, Mom. And just like that, he was alone with the piano. He sat down, placed his fingers on the keys, and began to play. The piece he'd chosen was difficult, full of complicated runs and tricky timing. But his fingers remembered. Even after missing practice, even with all the stress and worry, his fingers remembered. For the next 2 weeks, this became Daniel's routine. Wake up at 5. Walk to school with his mother. Practice from 6 to 7. Then stay at school all day, exhausted but determined. The other kids noticed he looked tired. Tommy made jokes about him falling asleep in class. Guess the pressure's getting to him, Tommy would say with a smirk. But Daniel kept going. Every morning, he'd stumble into that empty music room and pour everything he had into the piano. His fingers grew stronger. The difficult passages became easier. The piece started to feel like a part of him. Mr. Henderson was still in the hospital. Daniel had visited once with his mother, but the old man was too weak to talk much. He just squeezed Daniel's hand and smiled. Keep practicing, he'd whispered. Don't give up. 3 days before the showcase, something happened that Daniel hadn't expected. He was practicing his usual morning session when Mrs. Patterson walked in earlier than normal. She stood in the doorway listening. When he finished the piece, she walked over slowly. Daniel, I need to be honest with you about something. His heart sank. Was she going to tell him he couldn't practice anymore? When you first signed up for this showcase, I had my doubts, she said. I've heard Tommy play. He's technically excellent. Years of expensive training. I thought maybe I should talk you out of performing, save you from embarrassment. Daniel felt his chest tighten. But I was wrong, Mrs. Patterson continued. What you just played wasn't perfect. There were small mistakes. Your technique isn't as refined as Tommy's, but you know what? I felt something when you played. Real emotion. Real passion. That's something that can't be taught no matter how much money someone's parents spend on lessons. She smiled at him. I just wanted you to know that. Whatever happens at the showcase, you should be proud of yourself. You've worked harder than any student I've ever taught. The day of the showcase arrived faster than Daniel expected. He woke up that morning with butterflies in his stomach. Nervous didn't even begin to describe it. He was terrified. His parents both took the day off work to come watch. His mother pressed his best shirt, the one he wore to his grandmother's funeral last year. His father polished his only pair of dress shoes until they shined. You're going to do great, his father said as they drove to school that evening. But Daniel wasn't so sure. His hands were shaking. His mouth was dry. And in a few hours he'd have to walk out onto that stage in front of the whole school and prove that he belonged there. The question was, could he actually do it? The school auditorium was packed. Parents filled the rows of seats, cameras ready. Teachers stood along the sides. Students who weren't performing sat in the back, whispering and laughing. The stage lights were bright, almost blinding if you looked directly at them. Daniel sat backstage with the other performers, his leg bouncing nervously. His pressed shirt felt too tight around his collar. His hands were cold and clammy. He kept wiping them on his pants, but they just got sweaty again immediately. Around him, other kids were warming up. A girl practiced her violin scales. 2 boys reviewed their comedy sketch. Tommy sat in the corner looking completely calm and confident. He caught Daniel's eye and smirked. Mrs. Patterson peeked backstage. 5 minutes, everyone. First performer, you're up soon. Daniel's stomach did a flip. He wasn't first, thankfully. He was somewhere in the middle of the lineup. But that almost made it worse. He'd have to sit here, getting more nervous, watching everyone else perform before his turn came. The showcase began. Principal Morrison welcomed everyone and talked about how proud he was of all the students brave enough to perform. Daniel barely heard the words. His mind was racing with everything that could go wrong. The first few performances went by in a blur. A group of girls sang a pop song. A boy did a magic trick. The audience clapped politely for everyone. Then Tommy's name was called. Tommy walked onto the stage like he owned it. His clothes were expensive, perfectly tailored. His shoes were shiny and new. He sat at the piano bench with perfect posture, adjusted it slightly, then placed his hands on the keys. What came next was technically flawless. His fingers flew across the keys with precision. Every note was exactly right. The tempo was perfect. The dynamics were textbook. It was the same piece he'd played in music class, and if anything, it was even better now. The audience watched, impressed. You could tell they knew they were witnessing something skillfully done. When Tommy finished, he stood and took a bow. The applause was strong. Several parents even stood up. Tommy walked off stage with a satisfied smile. As he passed Daniel in the wings, he leaned in and whispered, "Good luck following that." Daniel's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His mouth was completely dry. He watched 3 more performances, barely registering what they were. A dance routine, a poetry reading, someone playing guitar. Then he heard it, Mrs. Patterson's voice from the stage. "Our next performer is Daniel Wright playing a classical piano piece." This was it. No turning back now. Daniel stood up on shaky legs. As he walked toward the stage entrance, he could hear whispers from the audience. He couldn't make out the words, but he knew what they were probably saying. That poor kid. This is going to be rough. Why did the teachers let him do this? He stepped out onto the stage and the bright lights hit him full force. For a second, he couldn't see anything beyond them. The audience was just a dark mass of shapes. His legs felt like they might give out. The walk to the piano felt like it took forever. He was aware of every step, every breath. Someone in the audience actually laughed. Just a small sound, quickly covered, but Daniel heard it. His face burned red. He reached the piano bench and sat down. It was slightly too high for him, his feet barely touching the floor. He looked down at the keys and they seemed to swim in his vision. His hands were shaking so badly he wasn't sure he could even play. From somewhere in the dark audience he heard Tommy's voice, barely a whisper, but loud enough to carry. "Here we go." More quiet laughter rippled through the crowd. Daniel closed his eyes. His mind was screaming at him. "You can't do this. You're going to embarrass yourself. Everyone's going to laugh. You should have dropped out when you had the chance." But then, through all the noise in his head, he heard something else. Mr. Henderson's voice from weeks ago. "Real music isn't about being perfect. It's about being true," his mother's voice. "The only real failure is not trying at all." Mrs. Patterson's words. "I felt something when you played. Real emotion, real passion." Daniel took a deep breath. Then he opened his eyes and looked down at the piano keys. These weren't his enemies. They were his friends. They'd been his friends for 6 months now, every single day after school. He placed his fingers on the keys. They were cold and smooth, familiar. He thought about all those mornings waking up at 5. All those hours of practice. All those times he'd wanted to quit but kept going. This piece wasn't just notes on a page. It was every single one of those moments. It was his mother walking him to school in the dark, his father polishing his shoes, Mr. Henderson teaching him that passion mattered more than money. It was every laugh he'd endured, every doubt he'd pushed through. Daniel began to play. The first notes weren't perfect. His fingers stumbled slightly and he knew it. But he didn't stop. He pushed forward, finding his rhythm. And then something happened. The nervousness started to fade. The audience disappeared. The stage lights dimmed in his awareness. It was just him and the piano. His fingers found their confidence. The piece began to flow, but it wasn't just technically correct notes. Daniel played with everything inside him. Every ounce of frustration at being poor. Every moment of wanting something so badly it hurt. Every early morning practice session when he was so tired he could barely keep his eyes open. The music swelled and grew. His small hands stretched across the keys, pulling out sounds that carried weight and meaning. Where Tommy's performance had been cold and precise, Daniel's was warm and alive. It breathed. It felt. In the audience, people started to pay attention differently. Parents who'd been checking their phones put them down. Students who'd been whispering went quiet. There was something happening on that stage that nobody had expected. Daniel's fingers danced through a difficult passage, one he'd struggled with for weeks. He hit it perfectly. The music built to a crescendo, and he felt his whole body moving with it, swaying slightly as he played. This wasn't just his fingers performing. This was his heart speaking through the piano. The piece had a quiet middle section, soft and gentle. Daniel played it with such tenderness that you could have heard a pin drop in the auditorium. Then it built again, growing in intensity and power, climbing toward the finale. His hands raced across the keys. The music filled every corner of the room. And then, with one final chord, it ended. Daniel's hand stayed on the keys for a moment, the last note ringing out into silence. He slowly lifted his fingers and sat back, his heart still racing. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Whether it was good enough or not, he'd gotten through the entire piece. The silence stretched out. Daniel looked up at the audience, suddenly nervous again. Why weren't they clapping? Had it been that bad? Was everyone too uncomfortable to react? Then he saw something that made his breath catch. In the front row, someone was standing up. It was Mr. Henderson. The old man was there, still looking pale and weak, but there. He must have left the hospital just to come to the showcase, and there were tears running down his weathered face. He started clapping, slow at first, then faster, his hands coming together with purpose and meaning. Mrs. Patterson stood up next, joining the applause. Then Daniel's mother, tears streaming down her own face. His father beside her, clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Then something incredible happened. One by one, people throughout the audience began to stand. Not everyone at once, but like a wave moving through the crowd. Parents stood up. Teachers stood up. Even some of the students stood up. The applause grew louder and louder. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was real honest appreciation. Daniel saw Ashley standing, her hands together, looking genuinely moved. He saw Kevin from Tommy's group clapping and nodding. Even some of the teachers who doubted him were on their feet. The standing ovation continued. Daniel sat at the piano bench, completely overwhelmed. He didn't know what to do. Should he stand? Should he bow? He'd never imagined this. He'd never let himself imagine this. Mrs. Patterson came onto the stage and gently pulled him to his feet. She whispered, "Take a bow." "You earned it." Daniel stood and bowed awkwardly. The applause somehow got even louder. He looked out at the audience and found his parents. His mother was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. His father had his arm around her, and he was smiling bigger than Daniel had ever seen. Mr. Henderson sat back down, still wiping his eyes. He caught Daniel's gaze and nodded. Just a simple nod, but it said everything. "I'm proud of you. You did it. You showed them." Daniel finally walked off stage, his legs feeling wobbly. His heart was so full it felt like it might burst. Other performers backstage looked at him with new respect. Some of them patted his back as he passed, but the best moment came when he walked past Tommy. The other boy's confident smirk was gone. He just looked at Daniel with something like respect, maybe even a hint of jealousy. For once, Tommy Chen had nothing to say. Daniel found a spot backstage to sit and just breathe. He'd done it. Against everything and everyone who doubted him, he'd actually done it. His hands were still shaking, but now it was from excitement rather than fear. The showcase continued, but Daniel barely noticed the remaining performances. He was still floating, still trying to process what had just happened. That standing ovation, that silence before it, where everyone had been so moved they couldn't immediately respond. When the showcase finally ended and families started leaving, Daniel met his parents in the hallway. His mother grabbed him in a huge hug, not caring who saw. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. So proud." His father joined the hug. "You were incredible, son." And for the first time in his life, Daniel felt like maybe, just maybe, he really could be something more. The next morning at school felt different. Daniel walked through the hallways, expecting things to go back to normal, expecting the mockery to return. But something had shifted. Kids he'd never spoken to before nodded at him in the halls. A girl from his math class stopped him by his locker. "That was really beautiful last night," she said shyly. "I didn't know piano could sound like that." Even Kevin, Tommy's friend who'd made fun of him at lunch for weeks, gave him a small wave. Not a big gesture, but it was something. During lunch, Daniel sat at his usual spot in the corner. He unwrapped his sandwich and prepared for another meal alone. But then Ashley walked over carrying her tray. She stood there awkwardly for a moment. "Can I sit here?" she asked. Daniel was so surprised he almost dropped his sandwich. Yeah, sure." She sat down across from him. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. Then Ashley spoke quietly. "I owe you an apology. I said some really mean things about you, about the showcase, about you not being good enough to play piano." She looked down at her food. "I was wrong. Really wrong." "It's okay," Daniel said, though part of him still remembered how much her words had hurt. "No, it's not okay," Ashley insisted. "I judged you based on stupid things that don't matter, like what clothes you wear or where you practice or how much money your family has. But none of that has anything to do with music. You proved that last night." She looked up at him and she seemed genuinely sorry. "You made me cry. Like actual tears. I've been taking violin lessons for 3 years and I've never made anyone feel anything. You did that with 6 months of practice in a music store." Daniel didn't know what to say. "Thanks, that means a lot." Other kids started joining them at the table. Not everyone, but enough that Daniel wasn't eating alone anymore. They asked him questions about how he learned, about the piece he played, about what it felt like to perform in front of everyone. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt like he belonged. But the biggest surprise came from Tommy. The other boy avoided Daniel all morning, which was fine. Daniel didn't need his approval. But then right before the final bell, Tommy appeared at Daniel's locker. "Hey," Tommy said. His confident swagger was gone. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Hey," Daniel replied cautiously. Tommy was quiet for a moment, like he was struggling with what to say. "You deserved that standing ovation. What you played last night, it was different than anything I've ever heard." Daniel waited, not sure where this was going. "My parents have spent thousands of dollars on my lessons," Tommy continued. "I can play anything you put in front of me, perfectly. But last night, watching you, I realized something." He looked Daniel in the eye. "I don't love piano. Not like you do. I do it because my parents want me to, because it looks good, because it's what I'm supposed to do." He paused, then said something that sounded hard for him to admit. "You play because you can't imagine not playing. And people can tell the difference." Tommy stuck out his hand. Daniel stared at it for a second, then shook it. "Maybe you could teach me something sometime," Tommy said. "Not technique. I've got that. But whatever it is that makes your music sound the way it does." "Yeah," Daniel said, genuinely surprised. "Yeah, maybe I could." After school, Daniel headed straight to Henderson's music store. The closed sign was still on the door, but he could see light inside. He knocked and Mr. Henderson appeared, moving slowly but smiling. "There's my star performer," the old man said as he unlocked the door. Come in, come in." "Should you even be out of the hospital?" Daniel asked, worried. "Probably not," Mr. Henderson admitted with a chuckle, "but I couldn't stay away any longer. Besides, I've got something to discuss with you." They sat down in the shop, surrounded by instruments. Mr. Henderson looked tired but happy. "Daniel, I've been teaching music for over 40 years. I've seen hundreds of students come and go. But what you did last night reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." He leaned forward. "I want to give you real lessons. Proper ones, no charge. You've got raw talent, but with some guidance, you could be truly exceptional. Daniel's eyes went wide. Really, you'd do that? I'd be honored to do that. You've already taught yourself more in 6 months than most kids learn in 2 years of lessons. Imagine what you could do with actual training. Mr. Henderson smiled. Besides, I'm getting old. I'd like to pass on what I know to someone who will actually use it. Someone who understands that music isn't about showing off. It's about touching people's hearts. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Henderson said with a wink. I'm going to work you hard. Real training isn't easy. But something tells me you're up for the challenge. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's life changed in ways he never expected. Mr. Henderson started giving him lessons 3 times a week. Real, structured lessons that taught him proper technique and music theory. His natural talent combined with actual training made him improve rapidly. But something even more unexpected happened. Mrs. Patterson called Daniel's parents in for a meeting. When they all sat down in her office, she had news that seemed impossible. There's a foundation in the city that provides scholarships for young musicians who show exceptional promise, she explained. They heard about Daniel's performance at our showcase. Someone filmed it and sent it to them. Daniel's mother grabbed his hand. They want to offer Daniel a full scholarship to their youth music program, Mrs. Patterson continued. It includes weekly lessons with professional instructors, access to practice facilities, and even opportunities to perform at real concerts around the state. His parents looked at each other in disbelief. Daniel felt like he was dreaming. There's more, Mrs. Patterson added. The scholarship also includes a stipend to help with transportation costs and a piano rental for your home, so Daniel can practice whenever he wants. His mother started crying. His father just kept shaking his head in amazement. This can't be real, he whispered, but it was real. All of it. The principal's office ceremony a week later where they announced the scholarship felt surreal. Photographers were there. The local newspaper ran a story about Daniel, the 9-year-old boy from the apartment above the laundry who'd taught himself piano in a music shop. But Daniel tried not to let it go to his head. He remembered where he came from. He remembered every person who'd laughed at him, every moment of doubt, every early morning practice session. Months passed. Then years. Daniel continued training, getting better and better. Mr. Henderson's lessons combined with the scholarship program turned him into a genuinely skilled pianist. He performed at competitions and concerts. He won awards, but he never forgot the most important lesson. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about having the most expensive instrument or the fanciest teachers. It was about loving what you do so much that it pours out of you when you play. Daniel made a promise to himself. When he got older, when he became the pianist he dreamed of being, he'd do for other kids what Mr. Henderson had done for him. He'd give free lessons to children who couldn't afford them. He'd teach them that music didn't care about your address or your bank account. It only cared about your heart. Years later, when Daniel was in high school, he started a program doing exactly that. Every Saturday, he'd teach piano to kids from families who couldn't afford lessons. He used Mr. Henderson's shop, which the old man happily provided. One of his first students was a 7-year-old girl who'd press her nose against the shop window every day after school, just like Daniel used to do. When he invited her in to try the piano, her eyes lit up exactly the way his had years ago. "You can really teach me?" she asked, hardly believing it. "I can," Daniel said, smiling. "But you've got to promise me something. You've got to promise to play with your whole heart. Not just your fingers," she nodded eagerly. And Daniel knew she meant it. As he watched her place her small hands on the keys for the first time, he thought about that night at the school showcase. The night when everyone laughed at the poor kid who thought he could play piano. The night he proved them all wrong. That night had taught him something important. People will always doubt you. They'll always judge you based on things that don't matter. But if you work hard enough, if you believe in yourself even when nobody else does, if you pour your heart into what you love, you can do anything. The piano didn't care that Daniel lived above a laundry. It didn't care that his clothes were secondhand or that he couldn't afford fancy lessons. The piano only cared that when Daniel sat down to play, he gave it everything he had, and in the end, that made all the difference. Mr. Henderson, now in his 80s and moving much slower, would sit in his shop and watch Daniel teach the neighborhood kids. Sometimes he'd smile and shake his head in wonder. "You know what the best part is?" he said to Daniel one afternoon after the last student had left. "What's that?" Daniel asked. "I gave you a chance because I saw something special in you. But you didn't just take that chance for yourself. You're passing it on. You're giving other kids the same opportunity I gave you." The old man's eyes were misty. "That's how it's supposed to work. That's what music is really about. Not performing for applause, but lifting each other up." Daniel looked around the shop at the piano that had changed his life, at the instruments waiting for other dreamers to discover them. "You taught me that," he said. "You taught me that music is bigger than just one person." "No," Mr. Henderson said gently. "You taught yourself that. I just gave you a piano and some time. Everything else, all this, that came from you." That night, Daniel walked home the same way he used to walk home from practice years ago, past the same buildings, the same streets. Nothing had really changed about the neighborhood. His parents still lived in the same apartment above the laundry. But everything had changed for Daniel. And more importantly, he was changing things for other kids just like him. Kids who had dreams bigger than their circumstances. Kids who just needed someone to believe in them. As he climbed the stairs to his family's apartment, Daniel smiled. He'd come a long way from that scared 9-year-old boy pressing his nose against a shop window. But he'd never forget him. Because that boy, with his impossible dream and his stubborn determination, had taught Daniel the most important lesson of all. Never let anyone tell you what you can't do. Especially when it comes to the things you love most.